Good morning, students. Welcome to lectures by Professor Dr. Shilpa Khatri Babbar. Today's lecture is on Max Weber's understanding of class as an agency of social stratification. So, Weber looked at classes in terms of both market as well as work situations. So, unlike Karl Marx, who was viewing classes only in terms of market situation, only in terms of owners and non-owners of modes of production, means of production, he was seeing classes only in terms of mode of production. However, Max Weber is seeing it both in terms of market as well as a work situation. The market situation refers to material rewards and life chances, such as pay security and opportunity for promotion, while the work situation it refers to work tasks and production technology and the structure of social relations as well as control systems in firms. And he says that there is a congruence, there is a kind of a relationship between the market situation and the work situation, in that the market rewards and working conditions become progressively better as one ascends the class hierarchy, as one moves ahead in the class hierarchy. So, now to understand it a little further, he is and on this slide, let me warn you, is going to be at a level of abstraction. However, I assure you that the clarity would come in a couple of slides. So when he's identifying classes, he or describing what our class is all about, he's talking about in terms of three aspects of classes. Number one is when he sees it as a specific casual component of life chances of actors. Second important issue is this life chance is resting exclusively on economic interests and wealth. And third is that it is represented under conditions of labor and commodity market. Now, to understand what he's basically talking about, I need to first understand that what is this concept of life chances which Max Weber is talking about. So, the next slide, if you will see, it's talking about life chances. So, what is Weber doing? Weber is basically saying that life chances are the chances that an individual has of sharing in economic and cultural goods of society. So instead of as very simplistically put across at in a very elementary level by Karl Marx, that there are two sets of classes, and he gave a dichotomous division, that there are two sets of classes, one who are the owners of the means of production and others who are not the owners of the means of production. So nowhere has he spoken about similar life chances by all the owners. In fact, he did speak about a conflict between the existent haves and the emerging haves. Now here, Max Weber is on a similar, though not on the same lines, but he insists that life chances are those chances, those situations wherein individuals or collectives are sharing common economic and cultural goods of society. And surely he is saying that the distribution of these goods is not symmetrical, it is asymmetrical. In other words, rewards are unequally distributed in most societies. And so are the cultural goods, including the differentiated accesses to those goods. So, for Max Weber, class is just not about material existences. It is about work related issues, it's about life chances, life situations, it is about skill and so on and so forth, and which we will understand in the upcoming in this slide, where he says what are the sources of market. It is not just capital. Capital is indeed one important source of market capacity. However, skill and education are also determinants of one's position in the market. That is, skill and education also decide which class you belong to. So they are not just two classes, those who own all the means of production and those who own none. So Max Weber is against this particular dichotomous simplistic understanding as posited by Karl Marx, and he says that capital is only one source of market capacity. Skill and education are also other determinants of one's position in the market, that is, one's class. So now Weber is arguing that while property owners are a class, as emphasized upon by Karl Marx, however, those whose skills were scarce and rarely found also commanded high salaries and constituted a separate class in themselves who cannot be ignored as were ignored by Karl Marx. So then what is he basically trying to say? He is insisting that yes, the possession of property does define the main class difference. There is no doubt about it. However, we need to understand that this particular class of the property is not a homogeneous class, is not a coherent class. The owners of property have a definite advantage and in some cases even a monopoly on action in market of commodities, especially that of labor. They have a privileged access to the sources of wealth creation by virtue of ownership and control of market. However, there is a subdivision amongst these property owners. What is this subdivision all about? It is based on the means of their wealth creation. How are the property owners? They are creating wealth. How are they? It is not always in terms of appropriation. So, how are they creating wealth? And he says that there could be two subclasses. One is entrepreneurs, and other are the rentiers. Entrepreneurs are those property, the subdivision, who use wealth in commercial ventures. However, rentiers profit by interest on their property through investment or rent of land. Both the forms of ownership, they yield advantages resulting from the ability to convert property into money. So one thing is for sure that in the classification of classes, which we are going to put across as laid down by Max Weber, there is one significant class, and that is the class of the property. However, that class is not a homogeneous category in terms of a mere categorization as owners of means of production. No, there is a property, then this property is further subdivided into the entrepreneurs and into another subdivision called the rentiers. So then he says, so if there is a class of property, there is also bound to be a class of the property less. Are you understanding? So this property less need not necessarily be the has not, the exploited, the appropriated, the rarefied, the alienated, but yet there is a class of property less, and this class is defined by the kinds of services individual workers provide in labor market, which need not necessarily be physical labor. It could be, so your white collared also would be a part of that particular labor market. The blue collared would also be a part of that labor market. So in terms of the kind of services which the individual workers are providing in the labor market, do we understand this class of the property less? The workers, he says, could either be classified as skilled or as semi-skilled or as unskilled, and these distinctions are based on the value of different kinds of labor. Different wages result in different qualities in terms of standard of living. So any good director in a corporate office would be living as well as the property. So the life chances, the standard of living becomes very, very crucial here. So now what is happening? So it's very essential for me to put across right away, and in fact, simultaneously, we have been addressing this. What makes Weber different from Karl Marx? So one thing which we have fully understood is that Weber is surely not talking about polarization of classes. He's not talking about just a dichotomous division of classes into the owners and non-owners, or haves and haves not, in terms of only and only means of production. So he is talking about of classes who are propertied and propertyless. However, none of the two categorization are homogeneous. And at the same time, I would also tell you in advance that he does not put across a dichotomous division and puts across a division where there are four different classes, and we'll get back to it. The second thing which is important to understand here is he does not believe in uniformity of action. So when the group is not homogeneous, then why would the action be homogeneous? So he just does not believe that class interest would necessarily lead to any form of uniformity in action, because class is not the only interest. There are other sources of interests also. So this community or societal action through which that entire historical materialism, if you remember, from ancient society to capitalistic mode of production has taken place, this community or societal action is the uh, is not a result of merely class interest, but then is it that the community action or societal action does not take place? Max Weber says that's not what I'm trying to say. The only thing I'm trying to say is that agency of change, the agency which is wanting to bring about community or societal action, is an agency which is not defined through economy, but actually is defined through mentality. And we'll come to it in our next slide, that it is actually the intellectual class which is holding the responsibility of community or societal action. So coming back to this point, neither communal nor societal action is the inexorable result of class interest. So, Weber is primarily challenging the Marxian notion of only and only the material basis of social action. He's not denying it outright, but rather introducing an element of unpredictability that we need to understand. So there is a very interesting write-up which I'm going to read for all of you, and this is actually a culmination from different scripts. So it reads as Weber sees no evidence to reject the view of the fact that a similar class situation would necessarily develop a common identity, recognize shared interests, and take collective actions to further those interests. A common market situation may provide a basis for collective action. However, he sees this only as a possibility. So it is not the only possibility. However, it indeed is a possibility. Another important point where they differ, where Weber and Marx differ, is that Weber did not believe that proletarian revolutionary action would arise as a result of structural contradictions. In fact, when we were doing Karl Marx, I had very clearly put across that this defined the transition from primitive communism to modern rational communism, and the state would come to an end. It is too simplistic an understanding of history, because history is never uniform. So there is a difference between apparent difference between an obvious difference between Max Weber and Karl Marx. So now let's move on to what we were discussing, is that community and societal action does take place. However, it is not the class interest which is actually bringing about this action, but there is this role of intellectuals in social and communal action. Now, this is a very, very important element which has been brought about by Max Weber. He says that when we talk about communal or societal action, we need to understand that the general cultural conditions play a very large role in this determination. So, intellectuals occupy a key position here, and Weber argues that the extent, so there are two things that Weber is basically arguing is that there has to be a consciousness that has to be created. There is no doubt about it. So there is this, maybe he's not used the term false consciousness. However, there is a lack of consciousness which is there. So Weber says that the extent of the contrast between the property owners and the property less must become transparent to the workers in order for any kind of collective action around the issue of class to occur. So this is the first most important point, that the workers must be aware, there should be a transparency of the contrasting situation between the property owners and the propertyless. Intellectuals function either to call attention to or explain these contrasts between the property owners and propertyless, or maybe even to obscure them. So they hold a lot of power. Now he adds further that for communal or societal action to take place, the workers must not only recognize the difference in the wealth and the opportunity, but these differences must be seen as a result of distribution of property and economic power. So this difference between the owners and the propertyless is primarily a result of the varied distribution of property and the varied distribution of economic power, and who is acting as an agent of bringing about this particular change. The agency of this particular change is the intellectual class. So therefore, unlike Karl Marx, he does not undermine the role of the intellectuals. In fact, sees them as a major agent of class consciousness. Uh, Now, if you move on to the next slide, so this is exactly what I was trying to put across to all of you, that he classified classes into four types. One, the property. Second, the white collar property less, so which includes the intellectuals, the administrative, the managerial class. The third is the traditional petty bourgeoisie, which consists of small businessmen and shopkeepers. So if you go down the lane, and I speak about Delhi in particular, so those petty bourgeoisie who are sitting in Chandni Chowk or Sadar Bazaar or Gafar Market, the shops may be minuscule in size, however, they are sitting on bags of money. So how can you ignore that they are a bourgeoisie, however, they are petty bourgeoisie and a very significant component of the society. And the fourth are the blue-collared workers or the working class. So this classification, unlike the dichotomous division posited by Karl Marx, seems to be a little more realistic. So then what does he speak about the class conflict between these four classes? He says class conflict indeed was common, and but it is not occurring at two extremes, because the two extremes actually have nothing to do with each other. So then where is this conflict occurring? This conflict is occurring between groups with immediately opposed interests. For example, the conflict between the workers and the managers, rather than the workers and the capitalists. So when there is a trade union, the recent case was that of Maruti. So when there is a trade union which is organizing itself, it is organizing itself against the managers. It is not organizing itself against the capitalists, against the owners. They come much later, because there is a hierarchical structure which is apparent here, and we need to respect that hierarchical structure. So I hope till now the concept of class as an agency of social change as an agency of social stratification is absolutely clear to all of you as posited by Max Weber. However, Weber's understanding of class of stratification does not end with class. Weber sees two more agencies of social stratification. One which he refers to as status, and the other, which we shall do a little later, he refers to as party. So moving on to status as an agency of social stratification. So if there is a discussion which is on Weberian or Weber's understanding of social stratification, we are required to pen down all the three. That's class, status, as well as power. And even when somebody is wanting you to compare Karl Marx with Weber on social stratification, it would be appreciated if you mention status as well as power. So while class groups do not constitute communities because they are not homogeneous, class groups do not constitute communities according to Weber. Status groups normally are communities. Status is defined as the likelihood that life chances are determined by social honor or by prestige. Status is identified or linked by a common style of life and the attendant social restrictions. So, what to wear, what to eat, where to go, where not to go, which restaurant should one visit, which a mall is a status symbol, whether it's promenade, whether it's Pacific, or whatever you may put across. So, they are communities. Okay, wealth is surely not the key determinant, is not necessarily the primary cause of status, though it is generally associated with it because it depends on your pocket also whether you're wanting to go to Emporio or whether you're wanting to go to any other mall. So, indeed, wealth is an important element, however, is not the primary cause of status. Some forms of property ownership. Now, this is very essential to understand that some form of property ownership are connected with prestige while the others are not. So, for instance, if we talk about which Weber in fact talks about old money and new money. So he says old money typically it confers upon the community a greater status than the new money. So there is a, I know sounds very capitalistic, at least to me it does. So again, I'm reading it out from a particular set of notes, and so let me just locate it. Yeah. So those who share the same class situation will not necessarily belong to semi-status group. The Nova riches are sometimes excluded from the status groups of the privileged because their tastes, manners, and dress are defined as vulgar. Now, you can excuse me if I sound so unkind. However, this is a very significant understanding. So, the only thing which I want to relate to is that. See, for instance, I look at geography. So, on the one hand, there is India Habitat Center, there is India International Center. On the other hand, you have the best of the five stars. Okay. Now, you might, as a part of Nova Rich, have a lot of money, visit the five stars every day. However, can you take membership of status geographies like India Habitat Center and IISC, India International Center? And I'm sure you are aware that no, you cannot. Right? So there is an obvious difference between old money and new money, where old money is conferring greater status. In fact, interestingly, the rentiers, if you remember, I told you about the propertied, and amongst the propertied, there are two subgroups. There are entrepreneurs and rentiers. The rentiers usually hold greater status than entrepreneurs. And this is very interesting because their wealth is less visibly connected to labor. Weber notes that material monopolies are the most effective motives for the exclusiveness of a status group because social restrictions such as marriage patterns, residence, and so on, they follow from differences in wealth, which is reflected in a prestige. However, one need to remember that the dignity of high status group is always worldly. It involves their distinctive lifestyle as manifest in patterns of association and consumption. However, the low status group, on the other hand, projects their sense of worth on salvation hopes. Their due, they believe, is guaranteed in the life to come. It is common for low status groups to believe that they enjoy a special relationship with their god or gods. So it's all about their karma, and tomorrow that's going to be their next birth is going to be any day better. And so, you, because you need philosophies to justify your condition of life. So I hope this understanding of status is clear to each one of you. We need to also understand a very, very crucial element here, that status divisions very often, and we've constantly been saying that there is this element of significance of material wealth when it comes to a status definition, though not always, exceptions are there. So, status divisions tend to get codified on the basis of a stable distribution of economic power. So, this stability of economic power shall go a long way in stabilizing the status division. So, something like what happens in the caste system. So, n number of years of Sanskritization will, over a period of time, in all probability, get you a recognition as a relatively higher caste. So, that's exactly what is happening in terms of what exactly is this codification, or how exactly is this codification taking place. And then Max Weber borrows from Giddens this concept of structuration and says that but just to give you a brief about Giddens' idea of structuration, Giddens argued that no sociologist should ever see individual agency and the larger social structure as in opposition to one another. That we have from day one, when we started understanding the idea of sociological imagination, we said that we are located within a social structure. So, agency and structure binary or dichotomy can never be existing. So, now what we need to understand is that both of them, agency as well as structure, they are two sides of the same coin. So, keeping that in mind, he says the processes by which classes may be transformed from economic categories into socially meaningful groups is commonly referred to as structuration. So, over a period of time, of course, there's a difference between old money and new money. Of course, there is an apparent difference, and new money is not looked upon very worthy. However, over a period of time, over generations, the new money would also Sanskritize, if I may borrow Srinivas's understanding, may also Sanskritize into the old money life chances, the old money style of living. Now, what are the factors which enable a structuration? And the factors which determine the structuration include primarily three, and we've also added the fourth factor. They would include residence in a single class community. So you start learning the ways of life, the everyday existences, how to communicate, so on and so forth. It is also determined by low rates of social mobility. So, not very many new people come into the class. So, it keeps people in one class over time, helps them to Sanskritize, because Sanskritization, as we know, is a gradual process, and certain common lifestyles. So, you visit the same restaurant, the same mall, the same set of religious, what do you say, places, and so on and so forth. And all of which tend to turn classes into identifiable social groups. Interestingly, class variation in social values and political identification may also add to distinctiveness of classes. So, whether you are, your social value says that you need to go out for a party, the kitty parties, if that's the culture and that is what is making you feel that you are at a higher status, go ahead, because that is what is demanded out of you to maintain a particular status. Next, we move on to the third element of social stratification, agency of social stratification, put across by Max Weber, and this is the last agency of social stratification, which is a party. Now, class and status interests, they do interact in the realm of legal order, which is the arena of politics. Political power is obviously often based on class and status interests. So parties are basically organizations of power. Their purpose is struggle for domination. So parties are commonly operating in a political legal domain, but as an ideal types, parties are surely not restricted into these particular fields. So although, as I've just said, parties are based on class and status, and they are usually organized across these distinctions. However, it is rare for parties to be solely based on class and status interests, such as that of a party of an entrepreneurial class interest would be in competition with one which is based on high status. Since economic power binds class together in some way, it is no surprise that parties reflect these complex patterns of interest. Parties represent a high degree of rationality in social action. Why? Because they require planning, their motive are very strategic. We need to understand that they all the three, that's class, status, and party, they are intersecting with each other. So social stratification, as understood by Karl Marx and as understood by Max Weber, they are two very distinct forms of social stratification. Max Weber sees it only as in terms of class as an agency of social stratification. However, Max Weber sees not just class as an agency of social stratification, but also status and the party as an agency of social stratification. And it is also important to understand that at least Max Weber's theory seems to be more realistic. So I'm sure this understanding is much more familiar to all of you. And keeping this in mind, once you are able to understand this particular lecture, I would much appreciate if you subscribe to my YouTube channel for further lectures in sociology, and also follow me on the blog, because simultaneously whatever I put across beyond the given PPT would be available for your reflection, for your critical analysis and understanding on my blog. And you could also ask your doubts and questions on my blog. I would be available for all of you. Thank you so much. God bless you.